Story 1. They were not anything unusual. Anyone is capable of it if they are pushed far enough. Story 2. There were many World War II veterans walking around in the 70s, 80s, and even 90s. They were like normal people. They did not like to talk about the war. Story 3. Someone suggested I make a job recommendation for a person, so I wanted to meet him first. He gave me really strange vibes, and I avoided recommending him. Years later, I found out he killed the husband of his mistress and dumped him in a bag in the trunk of an abandoned car. They were both caught and are in jail. Story 4. Yes, he was my brother long before we stopped talking. He looked harmless and friendly but had a lot of hate inside. Story 5. I met him in 8th grade. He was a funny guy, and I would talk to him in the school hallways. As a freshman in high school, he was still a funny guy and really cool with me. He never gave any bad vibes. Over the summer, going into our sophomore year, his name was all over the papers and news. He had killed someone during a robbery gone wrong. Story 6. My cousin surgeon is a great person but should have avoided drinking alcohol that day. Story 7. Every day, due to my job, I once asked a man who murdered his neighbor what he was thinking. He kept replying, "Nothing," even after I mentioned he was throwing his life away along with his 4-year-old daughters and that he was going to end up in prison. He kept saying, "I never thought of the consequences, not for a microsecond." Story 8. I have met a few criminal killers who range from being completely unstable to normal people with horrible circumstances. More interestingly, I have met a few former Central Intelligence Agency and active Marine snipers. They are all the nicest and most awkward guys in the room, with a demeanor very similar to Tim Wall's. Story 9. Worked early morning stock with a man who later killed his wife. Not exactly a shock. He was kind of brutish and strongly built, like a caveman. He liked me, though. Story 10. Yes, he fought in the original Gulf War. He says he had multiple enemy kills. He was a tornado pilot and one of the nicest people I have ever met. He is an older man now who does a lot for the village. Story 11. I knew several people who were killed during my time as an army infantryman. They were about as normal as anyone else. They do not talk about it. Many people feel regret. There are individuals who seek out combat. I do not support that. Story 12. Yes, a family member who killed their spouse, my mother's sibling, in a fit of jealous rage after finding them in bed with another person. It happened in the 1970s before I was born, and they served their time. I met them at their child's wedding, my cousin, in the early 2000s. They were perfectly nice. I was probably the awkward one, as I was in my early 20s and had only ever grown up hearing about my family's grief over the loss of their child and sibling. I didn't talk to them for long, but I know they have a relationship with their 3 children, who, as far as I am aware, all know what happened. I understand the surviving parent did a lot to rehabilitate and had never been in trouble before. It was classified as a crime of passion when it was prosecuted, and they fully accepted what they had done. As nice as they were, I couldn't get the knowledge of what they had done out of my mind when speaking to them. Story 13. Nice guy, good dad, a bit eccentric, liked fish and sold marijuana. Typical bar fight in his early 20s, threw a punch and the guy did not get back up. Could happen to anyone. He got out in his 30s. Like anybody else who has had a rough hand and some baggage but mostly moved on with their life. Story 14. Yes. A girl who spent time with my group of friends in the late 1980s was involved with 2 men in the 1989 murder of a businessman at the gas station where one of them worked. Story 15. Fairly normal but generally on edge and not very good at controlling his emotions. He was a soldier and clearly has some post-traumatic stress disorder demons. All in all, a good guy though. Story 16. Yes, I know a few people and I was surprised by how normal they look and how polite and nice they are. Story 17. She was evil. She killed as a teenager. For legal reasons, she was rehabilitated and monitored in adulthood, but she still had problems. Beware of the people you encounter in everyday life. Sometimes it is better to avoid conflict with such individuals. When you are young, you may not want to appear afraid, but in most cases, it is wise to stay away from someone capable of killing you. It is better to look foolish once than to be gone forever because someone had a psychotic episode. With the increase in mass shooter incidents, this advice is increasingly relevant. Story 18. When I worked for Child Protective Services, I met several people who had killed their children with varying degrees of intentionality. They often had a few similar personality traits: obsessiveness, difficulty tolerating interruptions, annoyed by a baby's crying because it interrupted their video games or other activities, immaturity and impulsiveness, would rather be out playing or partying, had children too early and were unprepared for how much it would change their lives, often told by family that they would be supported and helped, but then they were not. Low tolerance for annoyance, low threshold for losing temper, disproportionate reactions to everyday annoyances, punching a hole in the wall because your wife wore a short skirt and you feel disrespected. This is just one type of person. There are other dangerous individuals who blend in a little better. Story 19. Yes. My friend at the time killed his girlfriend out of jealousy. I knew his family and her family. Story 20. Yes, before he got caught, he was acting really strange. When we heard what happened, we were not surprised. Story 21. My sports teacher at primary school was strict and authoritarian. I did not like him because he scared me. To teach us how to swim, he pushed us into the deep end and pulled us out with a pole. One evening, he tragically killed his wife and children with a shotgun. Story 22. I met a man in California through some friends in the late 1990s. He and his girlfriend were visiting San Diego from Salt Lake City. It turned out he was there because his girlfriend was unavailable to be interviewed by the police in Salt Lake City. He had drowned his wife for the insurance money, and the police were closing in. Story 23. I worked in corrections, and in my experience, I found it odd that the murderers were the calmest people there. Story 24. I knew and Perry slightly. She was the murder mystery writer who was one of the teenagers in the case filmed as Heavenly Creatures and killed her friend's mother. She was reserved but a lovely woman, extremely generous to good causes. As far as I am aware, she lived a decent adult life and worked hard. She did not use her past as promotion for her murder mystery writing. The information only came out when a journalist discovered it, and she would not talk about it. Story 25. Yes, they are extremely kind. They believe in hard work, but they strongly believe in fairness. I believe they killed when they were wronged and got away with it for some reason. Story 26. I have killed, and people always say they never would have expected it. Even when I committed the murder, I felt remorse of sorts, I guess. Story 27. When we were kids, she was aloof in many ways, but when she trusted you, she was a good friend. It always seemed like she had gone through something that made her that way, but she would never say it. Her parents were Jehovah's Witnesses and lived between Hawaii and California. She would be left in California for what seemed like months at a time. I met her when she was 13 and I was 15. She seemed much more mature and sure of herself. She had two much older brothers who were barely around. I later found out the one she was closest to was dealing cocaine and continued until the end. He would be around just enough to check in on her. He had the same distant, aloof way about him. My parents were also Jehovah's Witnesses but very strict. I began to rebel and would spend a lot of time at her place. She was sexually active at 13 with a boy who was 18. He seemed to love her, so I didn't think much of it. I wasn't even close to being sexually active but had fun with boys I would meet through her. She eventually married a boy I knew growing up and moved to Hawaii. She had a couple of children. When we talked, things weren't good. They both got into drugs and she spiraled down. He made it out and she didn't. When she moved back, I thought showing her my family life, work, and fun side would help her get out of the dark place she was in. I have a sister who was able to do it, so I had a lot of hope for her. She would stay with us here and there, but eventually, she became open about her drug use and told me she had a type of schizophrenia. She stopped taking her medication, and when we would go out to have fun, I would end up in compromising situations. She had a drug dealer to whom she would trade sex for drugs. She was very promiscuous. My sister was as well, but this was another level. It took me too long to separate myself from her because her mom would beg me to help her since I was a good influence. About 3 months after COVID-19 hit, my sister, who lived down the street, called me and told me something bad was happening at my friend's mom's house. She had a machete and had murdered her mom with it. She wasn't able to stand trial due to her psychotic state and was sent to Patton State Hospital, where she remains. Her poor mom may not have been everything her daughter needed, but was a kind and good woman from everything I experienced being around her. I really loved her. I romanticized the whole situation for so long because of how much I loved her. I had never met a friend more loyal to me, or so I thought. I put my family in danger, and I'll never forgive myself. Being a good friend and loving someone has to stop somewhere, and I made a serious mistake. I don't trust myself to really have deep friendships with anyone anymore. I stick to my husband and have casual relationships now, and that's all I trust myself with. Story 28. I met the campus police officer who shot and killed the attacker in the failed terrorist attack on Ohio State University's campus in 2016. He was an extremely friendly person and seemed to have made peace with what happened. He was comfortable talking about the incident openly. He happened to already be in the area on an unrelated call when the attack started. The entire incident was over in less than a minute, and the attacker was the only person who died. It likely would have been far worse if he had not been there. Story 29. Went to middle and high school with him. He was a year younger. He was a bit of a class clown and definitely hung out with some people who were bound to do shady stuff, but nothing extreme. He was nice, chill, and I never had any issues with him. I remember walking off campus after school one time with him to get a Subway sandwich and even bought him one. Then we walked back to campus during either my sophomore or junior year. That had to be the last time we ever hung out one-on-one, although we would see each other around campus, always saying what's up and all. Years later, after graduating, local news broke a double homicide. I read the whole court case file, which also involved our star quarterback. He was involved because he was there, but did not commit any crime and was placed under witness protection. He is currently serving life in prison. I won't share the articles or court case publicly, but I will be happy to share them via direct message if anyone is interested. Story 30. My grandfather was a World War II and Korean War veteran. He was a tank commander. When he would rarely speak of combat, he was drunk. His eyes would have a hollow stare when he spoke of gunning down the enemy. Otherwise, he was a very nice man with big smiles and a booming guffaw when he laughed. At one time, I had a coworker who was a former police officer. He had been forced to kill someone in the line of duty. It had been determined to be a legal shooting in self-defense. But my friend quickly became morose when the subject was broached. That shooting was the reason why he left law enforcement. I have looked up the case. It was a clean, legal self-defense shooting as you could find in a textbook. No one has ever claimed that he was wrong for what he did. But my friend is his own tormentor. Since the global war on terrorism, I have had several coworkers who are combat veterans. Most have killed, but they mostly view the events as a job. Military dehumanization did its job in protecting them from psychological trauma. Mostly. Story 31. Yes, he is an older man I used to work with. He killed his son while punishing him for theft and ended up serving 7 years in jail. He seems like a decent man. All I know is that anyone is capable of murder. It is nothing small, but it is terrifying when you think about it. Taking a life, not an animal, a human being. Story 32. Yes, I had a customer who killed 3 people in a bar fight. He served his time and became a solicitor. My boss always told me to be polite to him and not to bring it up, so I was polite and never mentioned it. He was one of our more difficult customers, always demanding this or that. Story 33. When I was a teenager, a friend of my father's moved in. One day, the police were in our driveway. Our boarder had killed a man that afternoon. Our boarder, one of the most interesting people I have ever met, denied nothing. He was on a ladder installing something. A man came along and started vigorously shaking the ladder. Our boarder was thrown off the ladder, but, on his way down, was able to grab a crowbar that was right there. As he fell, he struck the man with the iron bar. When our boarder landed on top of his aggressor, he was unhurt. Our boarder just took his ladder and called it a day. He did not know the man had died until the police told him, nor did he check. As his account matched the witness account, the police just left. Nothing else ever happened. Story 34. Yes, multiple. Some are now medicated and crushed by what they did. Some say the person deserved it. Some harbor hate inside and will do it again. Some did it to survive. If you have ever met someone who was in combat military, you have met someone who has taken a life. Story 35. I worked with a couple of men. They were different, respectful, and I respected them. It was not out of fear but more an understanding. That was something they were capable of. They were not angry people or anything. They were just highly capable. Both were former military personnel. Story 36. My uncle accidentally killed someone when he was a teenager. He intended to scare the boy with a knife, but the other person stepped onto the blade. He is a normal older man now. Story 37. I knew some men convicted of murder. They seemed like regular men. Story 38. I met many murderers and people who had killed others when I was in prison. Most of them were fairly normal. Story 39. A great uncle of mine confronted his business partner for betraying him, and the business partner attempted to kill him. He would have succeeded if my uncle had not killed him first. He was beaten so badly he was unrecognizable. He committed suicide later that day. A really kind, family-oriented, loving man who could not live with the consequences despite acting out of survival and defense. Story 40. I worked at a surgical center where we would get inmates for surgery. My interactions were short, but mostly they were kind, respectful, and normal. There was one inmate who was very cocky and sure of himself. Thank goodness 2 guards were there to shut him down, and they did. They told him to be quiet or they would take him back to prison without surgery. He became quiet. Story 41. Most of the killers I know are normal, confident, friendly, funny, and outgoing. Story 42. One of my better friends experienced difficult times when he was barely a teenager. He is older now and did not grow up in a great situation. Many factors were involved, and it is not my place to discuss them. He has grown a lot since then and still has his issues, but he is someone I consider one of the good ones. Story 43. Childish, overconfident, and foolish. The man killed his own father. Story 44. No, I personally have never, but I ended up meeting a man at a local bar who turned out to have killed someone. The man seemed pretty down, so I got him a drink. We talked and he seemed calm. He said his wife and he were having a custody battle over his children, and obviously I felt bad. That's when I got him a drink. We exchanged numbers and then 5 days later he killed his wife. Story 45. One of the non-commissioned officers who was part of my Reserve Officers Training Corps cadre taught us a lot about small unit tactics. He was an infantryman and very explicit on certain aspects of conducting ambushes and clearing enemy positions because he had experience. He made it very clear that when you ambush, you shoot until the enemy stops moving, then shoot anyone still making noise. He emphasized not hesitating to double tap. It was legally questionable advice, but he had seen a lot. My grandfather was a Browning automatic rifle gunner in the Korean War. He did not talk much about it, but one thing he mentioned was that he would set the weapon sideways on a wall or board and fire since the recoil would make it jump horizontally, creating a flat field of fire. He also stole tracer rounds from the tankers so he could see where he was shooting. Story 46. I live in a country where we had wars in the 1990s. Every third man was involved in the war: my father, father-in-law, a few cousins. They were all there from 3 to 6 months, some for years. One was heavily injured. They probably killed people and they all look normal from the outside. Who knows what they carry inside? One thing I know is that they saw a lot of hardship there. Story 47. A man hit another person with his car. It happened on a dirt road late at night, with no lights on the road. The man who was hit was walking alongside the road, facing the opposite direction of traffic. He was too close to the road, and there was no shoulder. It was ruled an accident, but it seriously injured the man. Story 48. I went to school with a neo-Nazi who killed his wife. We fought once at school. No one won, but I am still alive, so that's a win. He also stomped on the head of a black man, along with 4 other neo-Nazis. He had haunted eyes. I remember he looked scared when he walked up to hit me. I was competing in wrestling at the time, so I managed to dodge his blows and deflect his aggression. Looking back, he must have been in a lot of pain as a child. He received 16 years for the murder. Story 49. I am not sure this is what you are looking for, but my brother-in-law went to a barn dance when he was in his early 20s. He got very drunk and couldn't find his date. He figured she must have left, so he got in his truck to drive home. On the way home, he lost control and rolled the truck. It turned out the date had also become very drunk and had gone back to the truck, where she passed out in the back seat. She was thrown from the vehicle, and then the truck rolled over her, trapping her underwater in the ditch. He served a few years in prison and then rebuilt his life once he was released. Overall, he is a good person who has never mentioned the incident, and neither have I. Story 50. I had a girlfriend who had a friend when they were in college together. He hung out with her and some of her friends regularly and was just a bit off. Nothing scary, just that he seemed inwardly directed and strangely fond of a blanket she owned. She called it varmint because it was small and fuzzy. Because of this possibly strange attachment, his nickname became Varmint. After they graduated, it turned out he became a serial rapist and killer who started his crimes while still in college. Nobody who knew him had any clue. When I met my girlfriend, I also became fond of that blanket. I ended up learning the story of Michael Bruce Ross, which still stays in my mind more than 30 years later. Story 51. People called him a dead man, a real jerk, and mostly a psychopathic personality. Idiot. Story 52. I was in the military and met more than a few. Some you might mistake for a librarian, while others definitely made it part of their personality. People are people. Story 53. I knew someone as a teenager who, 15 years later, murdered his girlfriend and then killed himself. He was always somewhat unpleasant, but nothing extreme that I ever saw. Granted, I only knew him casually. Story 54. When I was 16, I worked with a man from the former Yugoslavia. He was a hardworking and helpful person. One day, he became upset about the working conditions and went directly to our supervisor. He closed the door, and there was almost complete silence. The entire staff stopped working. After about 30 minutes, the door opened, and everyone immediately resumed work. No one discussed what had happened. In the following days, the working conditions began to improve significantly. We wondered what our colleague had said to our supervisor. Later, we learned that he was a military veteran and had experienced severe hardships. Story 55. We were friends. I was in 4th grade and he was in 5th. We lost contact, but I later found out he killed his father, dumped the body, and was involved in a high-speed chase and shootout with the police. He crashed a truck into a wall and was still shooting. I don't know how he survived. The body camera footage was intense. Seeing him felt surreal. He was well liked in school. I wouldn't say he was a popular kid, but he was known, and people enjoyed his presence. It's incredible what people are capable of. Story 56. In what context? A soldier or a serial killer? Yes to both. Story 57. A couple of stories. One man was in America because he killed a man who raped his sister in a Caribbean country, but his cousin was the chief of police and helped him flee to America. He lived with his sister, worked as a line cook, and got rides home from me. Great guy. He missed his kids, but he took care of business. I didn't know for months. I also worked with an old man at a plant once who was as happy as could be. He helped everyone and was a pleasure to be around. I found out after about 2 months that he had spent most of his life in prison for murder. He caught his wife cheating on him with another man in the 1970s, and it didn't end well for anyone involved. I worked with another man from Mexico who ran someone over while drunk. He served 7 years in prison. Also a great guy. The truth is, you'll never know unless someone tells you. The nicest, most helpful people you meet might have a troubled past. Story 58. The son of one of my father's former partners just came out of prison while they were together. He did kill someone. He was very nice and simple. I had to teach him how to use a computer and other things we might consider basic. I still wonder how he is doing sometimes. Story 59. He was psychotic. He was charming to women, but certain women like me who at the time obviously had some damage or trauma, saw his charm and ignored the red flags. He was psychotic when he killed her, but psychosis does not necessarily make you violent at all. Behind that, he was misogynistic, controlling, abusive, and macho, but ultimately he was unwell and scary. Story 60. I have known multiple people who have killed others. They range from genuinely dangerous psychopaths to totally normal individuals who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Anyone is capable of murder if put in the right situation. For instance, I have no urge to ever kill anyone, but if someone hurt my niece or nephew, I would absolutely defend my family, even if it meant killing someone. Story 61. A dear friend who passed away years ago told me a story that made my skin crawl. He was a border patrol agent as a young man. One night, he was in the desert patrolling with his partner. They stopped a van in the middle of nowhere. Inside was a man and several children, one of whom was being actively sexually assaulted. My friend shot the man dead on the spot. Honestly, I applaud him. Story 62. I worked with a man who went to prison for murder. His story was that someone was breaking into his house. He caught the person climbing in the window, wearing dark clothing and a mask in the middle of the night. He shot at the intruder several times, and the person fell out of the window into the yard. He reloaded as he went outside, and the person was still moving. It was dark, so he shot the person again, killing him. His daughter and wife were inside. He did not know the intruder's intent or whether the person was armed. When he saw the intruder still moving, he was unsure if any of his shots had landed or if the person was reaching for a weapon. For that reason, he shot again. He lost the case because once the intruder was outside the house, the prosecutor argued that he and his family were no longer in danger. The prosecutor claimed he did not need to follow the intruder outside to murder him. It was also argued that taking the time to reload the weapon showed there was no imminent threat. There was significant local political pressure to prosecute him because the person killed was the son of someone important, famous, and wealthy in the area. He also had a poor public defender. He served only 5 years before being released. He was a decent person, quiet by nature. When interviewed after his release, he said that if the situation happened again, he would likely handle it the same way to keep his family safe. I do not know if this is part of the story, but it is worth mentioning that he was absolutely huge, probably around 6 feet 8 inches tall and close to 300 pounds but not overweight. He could probably overpower several people with his bare hands if he wanted to. Story 63. Yes, but I did not know it at the time. A man in his 30s killed his own father with an axe when he was a teenager. He was completely ordinary, even mundane. Apparently, his father was quite aggressive and a raging alcoholic, prone to violence. One day, a fight broke out between them while they were doing forestry work or something like that. It escalated when the father threw a piece of firewood at the man's face, breaking some teeth. The man snapped from years of misery, and the next thing was the axe biting the father's face. My father-in-law told me about this after we left. We went there to buy firewood. Story 64. Yes, and they are like a normal person. Probably a lot tougher mentally than most, but overall normal. Story 65. I shared a room with a former sniper for 3 days while in the hospital. He told me his life story, including killing state enemies in foreign countries and very boring details about working as a security guard in his later years. He seemed proud of his sniping skills, but he was not very bright, and I hope he made it all up. Story 66. I met a man after he was released from prison for causing a fatal car accident. He had limited coping skills, an anger management problem, and was deeply religious. He found religion in prison, but I wish he had developed better coping skills instead because he was a bomb waiting to explode again. Story 67. I'm not actually sure how many I've met. I bartended for 12 years, and many intoxicated people told me they killed someone. Story 68. I had a coworker at a call center who was a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning technician before starting with us. One day, while working late, he told me that when he was on call as a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning technician, He drove out late at night and accidentally ran over a pedestrian crossing the street. He seemed more or less normal, as that incident happened about 12 years before I met him, so he probably had time to process it. Story 69. I worked with a woman who conspired to have her husband killed. She served 25 years. You would never guess. She is great too. Story 70. I had a work colleague who later committed murder. They were intelligent, competent, well-read, witty, and spoke 3 languages. Story 71. My husband's coworker intentionally killed his fiancée because she wanted to leave him. He called her to come over, then opened the door and shot her in the stomach. He was sentenced to 10 years in jail, from age 32 to 42, and is now about 58 years old. He works and lives a normal life. In my opinion, he is an old pervert. He is always commenting on younger girls' photos, 16 years old and older, telling them how he would have them over any time, and no one can say anything about it because 16 is the age of consent here. Story 72. I know veterans. I have noticed that veterans who have seen actual combat are not thrilled to talk about it. My uncle served in Vietnam. He delivered mail at Da Nang and cut hair on the side. He says those were the best years of his life and talks about it all the time. Story 73. 2 really good friends, both military, both combat deployed, one in Iraq, one in Afghanistan and other places. Both are just regular guys back home with families, but I pity the poor person who breaks into their house. Story 74. I have worked on many M60 tanks, which I assume have been involved in numerous conflicts. They are surprisingly impressive though. Story 75. A friend from church stabbed his girlfriend to death while watching The Truman Show because he believed the movie was about his life. I saw him in Walmart one day. Apparently, he is a personal trainer now. Craziness. Story 76. Once upon a time, I matched with a man on a dating site. We got along well but stayed in the pen pal stage for a long time. We even discovered he had attended my stepdad's wedding, a wedding I was not invited to. Then suddenly he ghosted me. A couple of months later we reconnected, and I asked what had happened. He told me he was worried that I would eventually Google him. So, of course, I did right away. One night, while out with coworkers, they all got a bit too drunk, and he drove under the influence. They stopped to help someone on the side of the road, which turned into an altercation. He fled the scene while being chased by the police, lost control of the vehicle, crashed, and killed his best friend. He went to prison for a few years. Since his release, he has been sober, avoided driving for a while, and is deeply regretful of what happened. Story 77. I knew a World War II veteran who served in the Pacific Theater. He lost his legs below the knee, which made him an angry man. He often insulted and demeaned his son. However, he was very proud of his service. He frequently told war stories and glorified his time at war. He would tell anyone who would listen about the 50 men he killed. Story 78. I was walking to get wine at the gas station with friends in college when a homeless man stopped my friend's boyfriend and started talking to him. We, the girls, kept walking because I don't talk to random people. The man told my friend's boyfriend that he was homeless and couldn't get a job because he had committed murder. However, he said he killed a pedophile, so I thought he was a decent person. He was not violent or aggressive, but I still preferred not to talk to a stranger who told random people about the murder he committed. I prefer to stay safe. Story 79. Yes, he put a sex offender in a wheelchair and killed another one. He pleaded down to manslaughter so he did not spend life behind bars. He is somewhat institutionalized, but one of the nicest people you will ever meet. He has been working on reforming himself as a person, covering up all of his prison tattoos as well. Story 80. Played rugby with some Rhodesians who fought in the Bush Wars. Perfectly normal guys, but they just have a "this needs doing and I will do it" switch. Story 81. I was in prison with a younger kid who had flipped his car while under the influence of benzodiazepines and killed 3 people in the car. One was his best friend, and the other 2 were cousins. He was pretty quiet and kept to himself. Who could blame him? Story 82. He was a pastor, mentor, and friend of mine. Prior to the murder, I trusted him a lot. He was charismatic, down to earth, really funny, and insightful. Every time I visited home from college break, He and his wife would take me out to lunch to hear how I was doing. He secretly practiced polygamy, had a second wife, impregnated her, and told the whole church she was a surrogate for him and his wife. Within the first year after the baby was born, they got into some kind of confrontation and he killed her. He buried her body in his backyard. He continued to raise their child, left the state, and wasn't caught until many years later. He got a deal for manslaughter by telling prosecutors where her body was located. I don't know who he is anymore. I don't know if I was wrong about him the whole time or not. Besides the murder itself, the fact that he lied and covered it up for so long while continuing to preach that he accepted the deal and her family wasn't given justice, it's hard for me to accept. I think every single person is capable of doing the worst things. Most of us won't. And we have a good deal of influence over whether we get to that point or not. But my trust in people as a whole is now shifted because I truly believe we are all capable of great good and great evil. Story 83. I know someone who murdered a person and was deported. I met him and couldn't figure out why he was where he was. Anyway, a drug deal gone bad. He is an ex-gang member, wore socks like them, and had gang and prison tattoos. Nice guy. Great cook. Lives for his teenage years. I left my dog with him a lot. He helped me move. Cool person. If I didn't know, I wouldn't know. Story 84. Yes. From military to for hire to revenge. In my experience, the one thing they had in common was that they did not really talk about it. My friend was a Green Beret with a few deployments overseas, so I assumed he had a few confirmed. He was looking at a rifle and shotgun I had just bought, and he told me that he had a classic World War II rifle. He said he got it overseas and was able to get it back home discreetly. I asked where he found it. He said it was not uncommon for the opposition to use whatever was available, so old weapons were not unusual to see. Then he said the previous owner was no longer going to need it, so he figured he would hold on to it. Story 85. I know a lot of people who have killed others. They are pretty chill if you ask me. I treat them like I would everyone else. Polite, with respect, and a smile when I say hello. I just do not hang around. If I see you in the grocery store, it is, hey, how are you? I am never going to sit and visit because I am scared. Story 86. Total mixed bag. I used to do volunteer work where I worked closely with, at times, convicted felons. I worked with one guy. He was a very clean-cut, outgoing, nerdy Chinese man. He had been convicted of murdering his girlfriend, who was an international student in Vancouver, British Columbia. He always claimed he was innocent, but as I got to know him, he was very aggressive and definitely not all there. He would get these intense eyes when he was not the center of attention. I actually stopped working with him because he was on full release, was smart enough to find where I lived, and it got scary. I worked with another man who was the leader of 14K Triad. He had just gotten out of jail after a 14-year sentence. He was very muscular with a scar on his face. He was off and somewhat aggressive. He did not know how to interact with people, and you kind of had to explain simple social interactions and how they made people feel. I liked him, but he was a little off. Then I got to know another man who was pretty notorious and made a complete turnaround. He was huge, extremely muscular, fully tattooed, and looked like he was out of a movie. He was the nicest man. Story 87. Do veterans count? Yes. He was a normal guy, but the more he spoke, he would slightly reveal some things that showed they bothered him. However, he did not glorify killing or anything like that. He was also very disciplined, probably the most disciplined person I have ever met. Yet, he occasionally hinted that his discipline, especially with exercise, was his way of coping and therapy. Story 88. 2 kids from the town I grew up in. The older one wasn't a terrible kid, but was often in trouble with fights and drugs. I didn't know the younger one. My dad liked the older one for some reason and wanted me to hang out with him more. He was respectful to adults and usually in a good mood. Another one was a little kid with a bad temper who often ran his mouth. I always thought he would get a beating, but when that time came, he grabbed a knife. I feel sorry for the victim. I think the kid graduated high school the week before. Story 89. Multiple because I work in a jail. Most are polite and respectful to staff. Some are quite funny. It is an odd thing. Story 90. A cousin of my wife's cousin went to prison after being convicted of manslaughter. He and some friends committed a home invasion targeting an elderly man they believed had a lot of cash at his home, but he did not. During the incident, the elderly man had a heart attack and died. All three assailants were sentenced to a minimum of 10 years in prison. I met the man a few times at family functions. He seemed like a regular person. Story 91. My relative was a good man who was pushed to the edge. Story 92. My workplace has a program with prisons for the reintegration of offenders. We have a couple of men who are released to work but spend their off time back in prison. One of them killed his wife while drunk and under the influence of drugs. He is clean now and near the end of his sentence. He is painfully honest about what happened and does not try to shy away from it. I believe prisons should be places of rehabilitation, and this man has come out of it in a better place. I like him. He has done an absolutely awful thing and lives with it every day. But he is just a normal man getting on with life. Story 93. Very self-centered, over-the-top Christian who obviously did not live according to his beliefs. 2 of his 7 children committed suicide. The other children ceased contact with him long before he was arrested. Story 94. I met a man who said that when he was a teenager, he killed his own brother. I had never met a guiltier person in my life. He constantly joked about suicide, and I felt so bad for him that I gave him many therapy tools, recommendations, contacts, and information. I really wanted to help him. He struggled and suffered so much that he genuinely believed he did not deserve to live. One day at work, he had a heart attack. He was very young. The heart attack did not kill him, but he ended up quitting his job afterward for other reasons. Story 95. Yes, a few. One is the brother of a close family friend who had schizophrenia and killed their mother due to a delusion. He spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric ward and was kind and remorseful. At one of my jobs, I worked with inmates. One man, when he was 19, coped with his father's suicide by committing arson. One fire got out of control and he thought the building was empty, but it was not. He was very hardworking and protective of us young women. He hated that many of the other inmates would hit on us, and he would stand up for us. We are still good friends. Another man I worked with was in prison for killing someone while drunk driving. I absolutely hated him. He was always breaking rules and did not care. Story 96. My close coworker was in one of the first Marine units sent in for the Second Battle of Fallujah. He killed 14 people. He was the most fun person I ever worked with. Hilarious. Though not so human resources friendly, jokes, pranks, and stories made him a great companion. When we had to drive the truck to the city, I would take over and drive on the bridges. His high-mobility, multipurpose wheeled vehicle drove over an improvised explosive device on a bridge. Story 97. I was in prison for a while in a European Union country. Prisoners divided themselves into groups: Europeans, Arabs, and Black Africans. The sub-Saharan Africans were mostly in for immigration crimes. Europeans were mostly in for drug-related offenses, while Arabs were the most violent. One Arab had shot a man point-blank. He turned out to be one of the nicest and most balanced people in our division. He did not gossip and was very polite. Another European was facing charges of double murder. We became friends. Have you watched the film The Shawshank Redemption? This man walked around with a smile on his face and was very well read. We had long conversations and he was always very interesting. He explained what had happened. Basically, it was a mistake. If you saw him walking down the street, you'd see only a handsome man with polite manners and a shy smile. You would never think he was suspected of murder. Story 98. My uncle was a war criminal in Yugoslavia. He was a nice person who was just protecting his country from Serbs. Story 99. Yes, a man with teardrop tattoos worked for my father, and my father confirmed he had served time for murder. He was quiet but cool and did good work too. Story 100. Yes, several. It really depends on the person as well as the reason they killed. For example, one person I know killed out of self-defense. He is calm, down to earth, and normal. Another person I know kidnapped, killed, and then raped a girl he did not know. He was definitely the type of person I would call odd. He would talk to himself sometimes and had a strange vibe about him, but was always friendly to me. Story 101. Aside from military veterans and police officers that I know, there was one man who worked at a gas station I frequented. He was a nice man and often gave me free drinks. One day, he murdered his wife with an axe and is serving a sentence of 35 years to life. He will be eligible for parole in about 25 years. Story 102. Yes, he was a very nice, calm old man serving a life sentence, but at a lower security facility due to the length of time he had served. He was just kind and did what he was supposed to do. Story 103. He was in the military, if that counts. Good guy, but he was one of the unlucky ones who had to shoot a child. He said they befriended the child over time, but then enemies used the child to attack them. You could hear it in his voice that it deeply affected him, understandably. Story 104. It was accidental and in self-defense as a child. He still served juvenile detention time until age 18. Besides being a little homophobic, he seemed rather well-adjusted. Story 105. At my first job after finishing school, I had a kind and friendly supervisor. Some years later, he tragically took the life of his son. Story 106. Depends. Those who went to war are almost normal. Murderers do not feel human. Story 107. We have all contributed to causing harm through the fuel in our cars and our purchase and lifestyle choices. Do you consider yourself a murderer? What are you like? What am I like? Human. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.